Biotech crops may dominate Nebraska's landscape, but might not be a silver bullet against pests. Ahead on Grow, what researchers are learning about that problem. Plus, we've got expert advice about weeds that have grown resistant too. And as Halloween approaches, farmers have been bewitched by bad weather. It's time to grow. As we kick things off, weather has been picture perfect this past week for harvest. Quite a change from the last couple of weeks. We caught up with a farmer near Trumbull. Here's our story.
Buddy, we got drowned out there.
With fields finally drying out, Andy Smith is back on the combine.
The last, seems like 3 weeks have been terrible.
Last year he was picking corn at this time. This year, trying to finish soybeans. It's been a challenge economically, but also the weather and weeds that have been a challenge, especially in bean fields.
Dad and I have talked about not planting any soybeans next year and just going with milo and corn. We can control the weeds a little bit better, but we throw out a lot of rye cover crop, and this year we went 10 pounds heavier on the seeding rate.
Hoping those cover crops will be one more way to stop weeds like Palmer amaranth.
They choked it out, so.
As soon as soybeans are out, Andy will put cover crops in.
So far, that rye has been paying for half the seed and most times all of the irrigating bill, so that's something you can't really turn down right now.
Plus grazing both corn and sorghum stalks, in addition to grazing cover crops.
Oats, collards, turnips, and radish, and that's just mainly for our livestock to eat.
The university encourages cattle to graze both cover crops and those corn stalks.
The UNL released that study last year proving that grazing your stalks is actually a good thing.
It's a busy time of year, but many are 2 to 3 weeks behind schedule.
It's been a long wait with the rains, and we did need the moisture as well, but it is good to have harvest going again.
Many report good yields, happy to just be in the field. And that leads to our poll question. Specifically for growers, do you intend to plant cover crops this fall? It's a trend that certainly has been on the rise over the last several years in Nebraska. Follow NTV's Grow on Twitter. All votes cast are anonymous. And speaking of cover crops and diversification, ranchers are encouraged to apply for grants. The USDA has established a Rangeland health initiative in the Cornhusker State. NRCS is offering up to $15,000 a year to ranchers who participate. The goal is to increase adoption of grazing management techniques that enhance rangeland health and profitability. They'll establish up to a dozen ranches across the state as demonstration sites. Producers have until November 17th to apply. Contact your local NRCS office for more. And as we see in this field near Grand Island, a lot more harvest activity over the last couple of days. The weekly USDA report shows wet weather again hampered harvest the week before, with 3.5 days suitable for field work. 17% of corn has been harvested, up from 13% the week before. Even with that progress, we're still well behind normal. On average, about 40% of the corn has been picked by now. Soybeans harvested about 1/3 complete, normally 2/3 at this point. Most of the winter wheat has been planted, but it's also behind schedule. 66% emerged. That's well behind 88% last year. Sorghum and dry bean harvest also behind schedule. But what do you call it when you harvest those soybeans? We have a clear winner. Well, over half of you say you cut beans. Next would be those who say you pick beans or combine those beans, and just a handful say you run beans. Thanks for having some fun with us on Twitter. BT corn may not be a silver bullet against pests. NTV's Lauren Coomer has more from Nebraska Extension.
Like medication, crops and insects are building a resistance to herbicides that we have used for decades.
Something this tiny can become a monster.
Since the event of agriculture, growers have had to deal with these resistance issues.
Things like insecticides, herbicides, plant-incorporated traits such as BT or other GMOs. So these are all issues that we've had to deal with, is resistance to these types of management practices.
With these practices comes the evolution of species.
Anytime we use that type of a management practice, there's going to be a small percentage in the population that has some natural resistance to that. And those are then the members of the population that are going to be able to survive and go on to reproduce and increase their genetics in the population.
More recently, products that have been adopted and used rapidly are causing problems for farmers.
We are starting to see some control issues, and this would be because we've been using them so often, we have selected that selection pressure for resistance.
Nebraska Extension says research has shown that rotating products year after year is no longer the best option.
It's important that producers, as we move forward here, they use an integrated approach. In terms of herbicide resistance, it's important if they're using herbicides that they use a mix of products.
Worley says the best way to prevent weeds is through canopy. With the resistance, they say to keep next season in mind when determining what seeds and herbicides to use.
Greg Ibaugh is one step closer to becoming Undersecretary for USDA. The Senate Ag Committee unanimously approved Nebraska's current Department of Ag Director as the USDA's Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs. A vote in front of the full Senate is not expected until at least next week. Also, Iowa's Ag Director got the okay to become the nation's Undersecretary for Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services. And the Trump administration this week killing a livestock rule. The Farmer Fair Practice Rules were announced in the final days of President Obama's administration by the USDA's Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyard Administration, known as GIPSA. National Farmers Union supported the rule, saying it would have protected family farmers and could have opened the door to more lawsuits, allowing family farmers to sue without showing harm to the entire industry. The National Pork Producers Council had called the rule a midnight attack in the final days of the Obama administration, so they're pleased to see them drop that proposal. Pork producers say the regulations would have led to consolidation and put farmers out of business. There may be more than meets the nose after materials were dumped at a Grand Island construction site. Police found a truck stuck in the mud next to a pile of stuff some thought smelled like manure. It happened at a home under construction near Grand Island Northwest. The contractor says he was hauling dirt the city had after clearing ditches. City Building Inspector Craig Lewis says neighbors thought the material was animal waste from the JBS packing plant. Lewis said he thought he saw a little bit of manure in the pile, but said it was mostly dirt. Up next, what's the EPA's new guidelines on dicamba mean? Plus, what's the deal with all the ladybugs? Stay with us.